The lights dimmed, and the audience quieted to a hush. My fingers hovered over the strings of the guitar, an instrument I'd never been seen with before. The tension in the air was thick, palpable. They were expecting a piano, expecting the familiar, expecting me to do what I always do. But tonight was different. Tonight, everything was different. As I strummed the first chord, the unfamiliar vibrations ran through me, and I felt the weight of every decision I'd made in the last few weeks. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness more than just a performance. This was going to be a revelation, a moment where my life, the life they thought they knew, would shatter right in front of them. My eyes scanned the crowd, landing on her. Lisa sat in the second row, her expression eager and supportive as always. Next to her, James leaned back in his seat, casual and confident, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. He had no idea that the chords I played carried a hidden message, a message meant for him and the woman beside him. As the song progressed, I saw the realization slowly dawn on her face. Lisa's smile faltered, her eyes widening with recognition. She knew. She knew this was for her. And yet, she couldn't stop it, couldn't stop me. The final chord rang out, and the silence that followed was deafening. I looked directly at Lisa and James, my voice steady as I spoke into the microphone. This song was inspired by a journey of betrayal, deceit, and the unexpected consequences that follow. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the tension but still unaware of the full picture. I paused, letting the words sink in. But tonight, it's not just a song. Tonight, it's a truth that can no longer stay hidden. The screen behind me lit up, displaying messages, text after text, proof of the affair they'd tried so hard to keep secret. Gasps echoed through the room, but my eyes never left Lisa's. This was only the beginning. A few months ago, this scene would have been unimaginable. Lisa and I had always been the couple everyone admired. Two musicians who'd found success and love in each other. We met in college, both chasing the same dream. We supported each other, grew together, built a life around our shared passion for music. However, things started to change when Lisa began working on her new album. She was always searching for something different, something that could push her boundaries. When she first told me about the musical conference in Los Angeles, I encouraged her to go. I trusted her. I trusted us. She came back from the conference full of new ideas, and with a new collaborator. James. He was everything I wasn't: young, charismatic, full of energy that seemed to electrify everyone around him. I saw the way Lisa lit up when she talked about him, but I convinced myself it was just the excitement of the project. After all, she was my wife. She wouldn't betray me. Not after everything we'd been through. But then came the late-night rehearsals, the constant texting, the inside jokes I wasn't part of. It was like they had their own world, a world I wasn't invited to. The doubts crept in slowly at first, a nagging feeling at the back of my mind. But I brushed them aside. I didn't want to believe it. Until that night, the night I saw the message. It was a simple notification on her phone, a brief glimpse into a conversation that should never have existed. My heart sank as I read it. The words were innocent enough on the surface, but I knew better. I knew what was really going on. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I waited, watched, and gathered the evidence. Every message, every call, every late-night meeting. It all painted a picture I couldn't ignore. And with every piece of evidence, the pain grew, twisting inside me until it became something else, something darker. Revenge wasn't my first thought. At first, I just wanted answers. I wanted to understand how we got here. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized there was no going back. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal that needed to be answered. And so, the plan began to take shape. If they wanted to play with fire, then I would make sure they burned. In the days following my discovery, I found myself oscillating between disbelief and rage. The idea that Lisa, the woman I had built my life with, could betray me with someone like James was unbearable. I replayed every interaction we had over the past few months, dissecting every glance, every touch, every word. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind? I realized that confronting her directly wouldn't be enough. Words were too weak, too fragile to express the depth of what I felt. No, I needed something bigger. Something that would expose them both for who they really were. And that's when the idea hit me: music. Music had always been my voice, my way of expressing what words couldn't. And now, it would be my weapon. I started to plan meticulously. The concert was already scheduled, a huge event that Lisa and I had been preparing for months. It was supposed to be a celebration of our careers and our partnership. But now, it would be something entirely different. I spent every waking hour in the studio, crafting the perfect piece. The song needed to be subtle, with lyrics that could pass as poetic metaphor to the unsuspecting ear, but sharp enough for Lisa and James to feel the sting. The melody was haunting, a blend of minor chords that mirrored the darkness I felt inside. I poured everything into it: my anger, my hurt, my desire for revenge. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances. Lisa had no idea what was coming. She thought I was just focused on the performance, just as she was. She continued her rehearsals with James, oblivious to the storm I was quietly brewing. Every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodnight, it fueled my resolve. She didn't deserve to walk away from this unscathed. As the concert date approached, I added the final piece to my plan. I would reveal their affair publicly, right in the middle of the performance. A bold move, but necessary. It had to be undeniable. Irrefutable. I wanted everyone to see them for who they really were. The thought of their faces when they realized what was happening gave me a sick sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my pride. And in a twisted way, it was about closure. After this, there would be nothing left to say. Nothing left to feel. Only silence. The night before the concert, the house was eerily quiet. Lisa was in her usual spot at the piano, fingers dancing over the keys as she practiced for the performance. I watched her from the doorway, marveling at how effortlessly she could lose herself in the music. It used to be one of the things I loved most about her passion, and her dedication. Now, it only reminded me of how far apart we drifted. "You ready for tomorrow?" she asked without looking up, her voice light, almost carefree. I wondered if she had any inkling of what was about to happen. Did she suspect anything at all? "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "I've been working on something new. Thought I'd surprise the audience." She finally looked up, curiosity flashing in her eyes. "A new piece? Why didn't you tell me?" "It's something personal," I said, and it was the truth. "You'll see tomorrow." She smiled, clearly intrigued, but didn't press further. I found myself wondering how she could be so at ease. How she could sit there, pretending everything was fine when she was lying to my face. But then again, she didn't know that I knew. That was her mistake, underestimating me. The next day was a blur of last-minute preparations. The concert hall buzzed with activity as the crew set up lights, tested sound, and made sure everything was perfect. Lisa and I went through our usual pre-show rituals, checking the set list, discussing the order of performances, and making sure everything was in sync. We worked well together, as always. On the surface, we were the perfect team. James arrived in the afternoon, and I couldn't help but watch their interaction closely. The way his hand lingered on her arm, the way she smiled just a little too brightly when she saw him. It made my stomach churn, but I swallowed the bile and kept up the act. I needed to stay focused. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning. I couldn't afford to slip now. As the concert time approached, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The nerves that usually came with performing were replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. Everything was set. The song was ready, the evidence was compiled. And the audience was about to witness the greatest performance of my life. Lisa and James had no idea that tonight would mark the end of more than just a concert. By the time I was done, they would be exposed, humiliated, and forever marked by their own deceit. This was my stage now, and I was ready to take control. As I stood backstage, waiting for the show to begin, I took a deep breath. This was it. The final act. And I was ready to play my part. The concert hall was packed to the brim. The air thick with anticipation. It was a big night, not just for me and Lisa, but for the entire music community. The turnout was larger than we'd expected, a testament to our reputation as a duo in the industry. But tonight, that partnership would shatter. Backstage, I could hear the murmur of the crowd, the excited chatter of fans and industry professionals alike. Lisa was somewhere in the dressing room, making last-minute adjustments to her outfit, while James was likely tuning his guitar in another part of the venue. I couldn't bring myself to think about what might be happening between them in these final moments before the performance. It didn't matter anymore. Soon, everything would come to light. The stage manager signaled to me, it was time. I took one last look at the set list, knowing it would soon be irrelevant. My song was slotted in the middle of the show, right before Lisa and I were supposed to perform a duet. The timing was perfect. I needed the audience to be fully engaged and completely immersed in the music before I tore everything apart. I walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, the bright lights momentarily blinding me. The energy in the room was electric, but all I could feel was the cold determination that had been driving me for weeks. I waved to the crowd, acknowledged the cheers, and sat down at the piano for the first set. The first few pieces went smoothly, almost too smoothly. My fingers moved automatically over the keys, playing the familiar notes with practiced ease. The audience was enraptured, and Lisa watched from the wings, her eyes shining with pride. I wondered if she could sense the undercurrent of tension in my performance, the barely concealed edge in my playing. But if she did, she didn't show it. Finally, it was time. I stood up from the piano and walked to the center of the stage, reaching for the guitar that had been waiting in the shadows. The crowd murmured in surprise, this was unexpected. But that was the point. This next song, I began, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, is something new. Something personal. I glanced at Lisa, saw the curiosity in her eyes, and then shifted my gaze to James, who was watching from the side with an easy smile. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. I strummed the first chord, and the sound echoed through the hall, low and haunting. The melody was unlike anything I'd played before, melancholic, with a sharp undercurrent of bitterness. The lyrics came next, and with each word, I felt the weight of my anger lift. Replaced by something colder, more calculated. The song told the story of betrayal, of a love shattered by deceit. The metaphors were thinly veiled, the references unmistakable to anyone who knew the truth. I watched as the realization began to dawn on Lisa, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion, and then to horror. James, too, started to piece it together. His relaxed posture stiffened, and his smile faltered. He glanced at Lisa, then back at me, and I saw the fear in his eyes. It was the moment I'd been waiting for. As the final notes of the song faded into silence, I let the words hang in the air, their impact sinking in. Then, I turned to the audience and spoke the words that would change everything. This song was inspired by real events, I said, my voice carrying through the hall. It's about betrayal. Betrayal by someone you trust more than anyone else in the world. The crowd was deathly silent, their attention fixed on me. I could feel the tension building, the anticipation of what was to come. And tonight, I continued, I want to share with you the truth behind this song. I signaled to the tech crew, and the screen behind me lit up with the messages. Text after text, the evidence of Lisa and James's affair is displayed for all to see. Gasps rippled through the audience, and I saw Lisa's face drain of color, her hands trembling as she looked up at the screen. James looked like he wanted to disappear. He turned to Lisa, panic in his eyes. But there was nowhere to hide. They were exposed, their secret laid bare in front of everyone they knew, everyone who mattered in our world. The silence in the hall was suffocating, and then the whispers started, growing louder with each passing second. I stepped back from the microphone, letting the images speak for themselves. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment they would face the consequences of their actions. The concert didn't end in applause. It ended in chaos. The audience, initially shocked into silence, erupted into a cacophony of whispers and murmurs. The revelation spread like wildfire through the crowd, as people exchanged horrified glances, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Lisa remained frozen in her seat, her eyes fixed on the screen. Her hands, usually so steady and graceful at the piano, trembled visibly. She looked at me, and for the first time in all these weeks, I saw something that resembled genuine fear. Fear and disbelief. As if she couldn't comprehend that I was capable of such a public, calculated move. James, on the other hand, was already on his feet. His confident demeanor shattered, replaced by a frantic need to escape. He muttered something under his breath, words lost in the uproar around us, and quickly made his way towards the exit. But there was no running from this. Not anymore. I stood on stage, watching it all unfold. The satisfaction I had imagined didn't come. There was no rush of triumph. No sense of victory. Instead, I felt empty. As if, in exposing them, I had somehow exposed a part of myself that I wasn't ready to face. The whispers grew louder, and soon people began to leave their seats, the concert forgotten. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the shock of witnessing something so deeply personal made public. It wasn't just about Lisa and James anymore. It was about me, about what I had become in the process of seeking revenge. Lisa finally stood, her legs unsteady. She made her way to the stage, her eyes pleading, searching mine for some kind of explanation, some sign of the man she once knew. But I couldn't give her that. Not now. Michael, she started, her voice breaking. But I held up a hand, stopping her. There was nothing left to say. Not here, not like this. I turned away from her, from the stage, and walked off into the wings, leaving her standing there in the spotlight. Alone. Just like she had left me. Backstage, the noise of the crowd was muffled. Distant. I found a quiet corner, away from the chaos, and sat down, my back against the wall. The adrenaline that had carried me through the performance was fading, replaced by an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. The anger that had fueled me for weeks had burned out, leaving only ashes behind. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To expose them, to make them pay for what they had done. And yet, all I felt was an emptiness that gnawed at my insides. The sound of footsteps approached, and I opened my eyes to see Lisa standing there, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There were no words that could fix what had been broken. Why? She finally whispered, her voice trembling. Why did you do this? I looked at her, and in that moment, I saw not the woman who had betrayed me, but the woman I had loved for so many years. The woman who had been my partner, my confidant, my muse. And I realized that, despite everything, a part of me still loved her. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. You made your choices, Lisa, I said quietly. And I made mine. She didn't argue, didn't try to defend herself. She just nodded, as if accepting the finality of it all. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As the noise of the crowd faded and the lights of the concert hall dimmed, I sat there in the dark, wondering what came next. The performance was over, but the consequences were just beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them. The days following the concert were a blur of headlines, phone calls, and confrontations. The music world was abuzz with the scandal, and Lisa and James found themselves at the center of it all. Their affair was no longer a secret. It was a spectacle, dissected and discussed by every media outlet, every gossip column,
every person who had ever known us.
I should have felt vindicated. I should have reveled in their downfall.
But instead, all I felt was a gnawing sense of unease, a hollow echo of the anger that had once consumed me. The satisfaction I had sought eluded me, replaced by an emptiness that I couldn't shake.
Lisa moved out the day after the concert.
There was no tearful goodbye, no final confrontation. She simply packed her things and left, leaving behind a note that said more in its brevity than any conversation ever could: "I'm sorry." That was it.
No explanations, no excuses, just those two words. Scribbled hastily on a piece of paper. I found the note on the kitchen counter, sitting beside her wedding ring. I stared at it for a long time, trying to summon the anger that had driven me for so long. But it wasn't there.
All that remained was a deep, aching sadness that I hadn't anticipated.
James, too, disappeared from our lives. He tried to reach out once, sending me a text that I didn't bother to read. Whatever he had to say, it didn't matter. He was nothing to me now. Just a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The house felt emptier than ever without Lisa.
The silence was suffocating, a constant reminder of the life we had built together and the void that now replaced it. I threw myself into my work, spending hours in the studio, trying to drown out the thoughts that refused to leave me alone. But no matter how much I played, no matter how many songs I composed, the emptiness lingered.
People tried to reach out, friends, colleagues, even family members who had heard the news.
They offered their support, their condolences, and their outrage on my behalf.
But I couldn't bring myself to engage with any of them. I didn't want their pity, didn't want their sympathy. I just wanted to be left alone.
But isolation didn't bring the peace I had hoped for. Instead, it amplified the questions I had been trying to avoid. Questions about what had gone wrong, about how we had ended up here.
About whether there had been signs that I had missed, moments where I could have changed the course of our lives.
But those questions had no answers, only more uncertainty. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the walls that had once echoed with music and laughter, I realized that I couldn't stay there any longer. This house, this life, it was all a reminder of what I had lost.
I needed to move on, to find a way to start over.
But I didn't know where to begin.
I started by selling the house. It wasn't an easy decision. This place had been our home for years, a sanctuary where we had created music, shared dreams, and built a life together.
But now, it was tainted, filled with memories that I couldn't bear to face.
Letting go of it felt like cutting the last thread that tied me to the past. The process of selling the house was a whirlwind of paperwork and meetings with real estate agents.
It kept me busy and gave me something to focus on.
But when the final papers were signed, and the house was officially no longer mine,
I was left with an unsettling sense of finality.
This chapter of my life was truly over. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a far cry from the sprawling house Lisa and I had shared. It was modest and minimalist, exactly what I needed. A blank slate.
A fresh start. But even in this new space, I found it difficult to escape the past.
Every time I picked up my guitar,
every time I sat at the piano, I was reminded of what had happened.
Music had been our connection, the thread that had tied us together. Now, it was a reminder of everything that had fallen apart. I tried to immerse myself in new projects, collaborating with other musicians, and exploring different genres. But the spark that had once driven me was gone. Everything felt hollow, as if I were going through the motions without any real passion behind it.
Then, one day, a letter arrived. It was from Lisa.
I hadn't heard from her since the day she left, and seeing her handwriting on the envelope sent a jolt of emotion through me that I wasn't prepared for. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what I would find. Inside was a single sheet of paper.
The words carefully written, as if she had thought long and hard about what to say. The letter was an apology, not just for the affair, but for everything that had led us to that point. She admitted that she had been lost, that she had let the pressures of her career and her own insecurities drive a wedge between us.
She didn't ask for forgiveness, she knew it wasn't that simple. But she wanted me to know that she regretted what had happened, that she still cared about me, even if things could never go back to the way they were. Reading her words, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. This wasn't the resolution I had wanted, but it was something. A recognition that we had both made mistakes, that we had both played a part in the unraveling of our marriage. In the weeks that followed, I began to feel a shift within myself. The anger that had once consumed me was fading, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I started to focus less on what I had lost and more on what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. I began working on a new album, something entirely different from anything I had done before. It wasn't fueled by revenge or bitterness, but by a desire to create something meaningful, something that reflected the journey I had been on. It was raw, honest, and deeply personal. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose. As the album took shape, so did my life. I reconnected with old friends, started to explore the city, and even found myself enjoying moments of solitude. I wasn't the same person I had been before the affair, before the concert, before everything had fallen apart. But I was finding my way back to myself, slowly but surely. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, playing through the final track of the album, I realized that I had found a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of forgetting, or of pretending that everything was okay. It was the peace of knowing that I had survived, that I had come out the other side stronger, even if a little scared. The future still held uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. Time passed in a way that felt different now. Days blurred together, but not in the numb haze I had experienced right after the concert. Instead, they blended into a rhythm, one that I was slowly starting to feel at home in. The new apartment, once so foreign and sterile, had begun to take on a life of its own. I filled it with music, notes and melodies that were mine and mine alone. I found comfort in the small rituals. Brewing coffee in the morning, walking through the city, and losing myself in my work. The album I'd been working on was nearing completion. It had started as a way to process everything that had happened, but somewhere along the line, it became something more. It wasn't just a reflection of the past, it was a declaration of who I had become. Each track was infused with the lessons I'd learned, the pain I'd endured, and the strength I had found within myself. The process of creating it had been cathartic. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something that truly mattered. The industry buzz surrounding the album was unexpected. Word had gotten out that I was working on something new, and people were curious. The fallout from the concert had only heightened the intrigue. Everyone wanted to know what I had to say now. There was talk of interviews, articles, and even a potential tour. But I wasn't interested in any of that, at least not yet. This project wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about finding my voice again. One evening, after a particularly productive day in the studio, I received a call from an old friend, Alex, who had been with me through some of my early days in the music industry. We hadn't spoken much since everything had gone down, but I knew he had been keeping tabs on me from a distance, respecting my need for space. "Michael," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "I've been hearing some pretty amazing things about your new work. Thought it was about time we caught up." We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, a place we used to frequent when we were younger and dreaming big. When I arrived, Alex was already there, sipping on a cup of coffee and looking as relaxed as ever. He greeted me with a grin, and for a moment, it was like no time had passed. We talked for hours, catching up on each other's lives. I filled him in on the album, the process of moving on, and how I was finally starting to feel like myself again. He listened intently, offering his support and insights without judgment. "I'm glad you're finding your way, man," Alex said, his tone sincere. "It's not easy, what you've been through. But I can see it in you, you're coming out of this stronger." His words meant more to me than I let on. Coming from someone who had known me before all of this, it felt like validation that I was on the right path. As the night wore on, our conversation turned to the future.
Alex had been working on some new projects of his own and was eager to collaborate.
He suggested we team up on a few tracks,
combining our talents to create something fresh and innovative.
The idea excited me more than I expected.
It had been a long time since I'd felt this kind of enthusiasm for a project, and I realized that I was ready to share my music with the world again, this time on my own terms. We made plans to get into the studio together the following week, and as I left the cafe that night, I felt a sense of anticipation that I hadn't felt in years.
The future was starting to look brighter, and for the first time since the betrayal, I was looking forward to what was coming next. Not long after my meeting with Alex, something unexpected happened.
One afternoon, as I was finishing up a track in the studio, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number.
I almost ignored it, assuming it was just another spam text, but something made me stop and check it.
"Michael, it's Lisa. Can we talk?"
I stared at the screen for a long time, my thoughts swirling. I hadn't heard from her since the letter she had sent months ago, and I had assumed that we were done. I had moved on, or at least, I was trying to.
But seeing her name again brought back a flood of emotions I thought I had buried. After a moment of hesitation, I typed out a reply.
"What do you want to talk about?" Her response was quick. "I need to see you. There are things I need to say in person. Please." Part of me wanted to ignore her request, to keep moving forward without reopening old wounds. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the years we had spent together, the dreams we had shared, felt a pull to hear her out. We agreed to meet at a quiet park near the edge of the city.
It was a neutral place, far from any of the memories we had created together. When I arrived, I saw her sitting on a bench, her hands folded in her lap. She looked different, thinner, more fragile, as if the weight of everything that had happened had taken its toll on her as well.
I approached cautiously, unsure of how to feel.
When she looked up and saw me, her expression was unreadable.
For a long moment, neither of us spoke.
We just stood there, two people who had once been everything to each other, now reduced to strangers.
Finally, Lisa broke the silence. "Thank you for coming, Michael. I wasn't sure if you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted, my voice more even than I expected. "But here I am." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I don't know where to start.
There's so much I want to say, but I know words won't change what happened."
I sat down beside her, leaving a small distance between us.
"Then don't try to change the past. Just say what you need to say."
She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, what we did. And I realize now how much I hurt you.
How much I hurt both of us.
I was selfish, caught up in my own world, and I let something that was so important to me slip away."
Her words were raw, filled with regret, but also a painful honesty that I hadn't seen in her before.
I listened quietly, letting her pour out everything she had been holding inside. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued, her voice cracking.
"I know that might never happen. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry, for everything.
And that I still care about you, even if things can never be the same." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had spent so long building up walls,
protecting myself from the pain she had caused. But as I sat there, listening to her, I realized that holding onto that pain wasn't helping me anymore.
It was time to let go.
"I appreciate that, Lisa," I finally said, my voice soft. "And I'm sorry too, for the way things ended. For the part one played in it. But you're right.
Things can't go back to the way they were." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I needed to say it." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our conversation hanging in the air.
But it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of unresolved tension.
It was lighter and more peaceful, as if we had finally laid our past to rest.
When we finally parted ways, there were no dramatic goodbyes, no lingering looks. Just a quiet understanding that this was the closure we both needed. As I walked away from the park, I felt a strange sense of relief.
The past was behind me now, truly behind me. And the future, my future, was wide open, waiting to be written. Life had a way of surprising me. Even after all I'd been through.
With Lisa's chapter closed, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. My collaboration with Alex was going well, and the buzz around my upcoming album grew stronger by the day. It felt good to be back in the thick of it, to feel the familiar thrill of creation, but this time with a different perspective.
In between studio sessions, I found myself exploring new interests, things I'd never had time for when my life had revolved solely around music. I started going to the gym regularly, something I'd neglected for years. It wasn't just about physical health. It was about finding balance, about reclaiming parts of myself that I'd let slip away. I also began painting, something I hadn't done since college. It wasn't about being good at it. It was about the process, the act of creating something from nothing. But the biggest change came in the form of unexpected connections. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in the studio, I found myself at a small gallery downtown. I'd heard about an exhibit featuring local artists, and something about it called to me. As I wandered through the space, admiring the vibrant colors and bold strokes, I struck up a conversation with the gallery owner, a woman named Olivia. Olivia was warm, witty, and easy to talk to. She had a deep passion for art, and as we chatted, I found myself drawn to her energy. There was no pretense, no agenda, just a genuine connection. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, with a promise to meet up for coffee and continue our conversation. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and I spent more time together. Our coffee dates turned into dinners, and our conversations became more personal. She had her own story of heartbreak, her own journey of rebuilding, and we found comfort in each other's company. There was no pressure, no rush to define what we were. It was simply two people finding solace in shared experiences. As we grew closer, I realized that I was beginning to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future, hope for new beginnings. I didn't know where things with Olivia would go, and for once, I was okay with that. I was learning to take things one day at a time, to embrace the uncertainty, and to let life unfold in its own way. Music still played a central role in my life, but it was no longer the only thing. I had found balance, and with it, a sense of peace that I hadn't thought possible. The wounds from the past were healing, and while they would never fully disappear, they no longer defined me. I was ready to move forward, into uncharted territory. The day of the album release arrived with a mix of excitement and nerves. This was the culmination of everything I had been working toward, months of writing, recording, and refining. But more than that, it was a reflection of my journey, my evolution as both a musician and a person. I decided to mark the occasion with a small, intimate concert at a local venue. It wasn't about making a big splash or attracting media attention. It was about sharing this new chapter of my life with the people who had supported me through it all. Alex, of course, was by my side, and so were a few other close friends. Olivia was there too, sitting quietly in the audience, her presence a steady comfort. As I took the stage that night, guitar in hand, I felt a calm wash over me. This wasn't like the concert months ago, where my emotions had been raw and uncontrolled. This was different. I was in control now, of my music, of my life. I was ready to share my story, not out of anger or pain, but out of a desire to connect, to show that I had come out the other side stronger. The set list was a mix of old and new, but the highlight was the debut of the album's title track. It was a song I had written late one night, in the quiet of my apartment, when the weight of everything had felt overwhelming. But instead of giving in to despair, I channeled it into music. The result was something raw and real, a reflection of both the darkness and the light that had defined my journey. As I played that night, I could feel the energy in the room shift. The audience was with me. Every note, every word resonating in a way that felt almost palpable. It was cathartic, not just for me, but for everyone listening.
When the final chord rang out, there was a moment of silence before the applause began. Loud, sustained, and heartfelt. After the concert, people came up to me, offering congratulations and sharing their own stories of how the music had touched them.
It was humbling to realize that something I had created could have such an impact. But the most meaningful moment came when Olivia approached me. Her eyes shining. "That was incredible, Michael," she said softly. "I could feel everything you've been through in those songs. It's beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "It means a lot to hear that." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the noise and chatter of the crowd, but in our own little world. I realized then that I was truly ready for whatever came next, that I had made peace with the past and was open to the possibilities of the future. That night, as I walked home with Olivia by my side, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't known in years. The journey had been long and painful, but I had come through it stronger, with a clearer sense of who I was and what I wanted. The music, the relationships, the experiences, they were all part of a larger story, one that was still being written. And for the first time, I was excited to see where that story would lead. With the success of the album release and the concert behind me, life took on a new rhythm. It wasn't as if everything suddenly became easy, but the weight I had carried for so long had lifted. I no longer felt defined by the betrayal or the pain. Instead, I was creating a new identity, one shaped by growth, resilience, and the connections I was building. Olivia and I continued to see each other regularly. What started as a simple connection at a gallery had grown into something more. We didn't rush things, instead, we let our relationship develop naturally. She brought a lightness into my life. A sense of joy I hadn't realized I was missing. With her, I felt free to be myself, unburdened by expectations or the past. As my album gained traction, so did opportunities. Invitations to collaborate, perform, and even speak at industry events began pouring in. I was selective, choosing projects that aligned with the new direction I wanted for my music. Alex and I worked on a few tracks together, and we both found that our combined energies brought out the best in each other. The industry was taking notice. And it felt good to be recognized for my work again, but this time on my own terms. One evening, after a particularly productive day in the studio, Olivia and I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. It had become our ritual, ending the day with quiet moments of reflection. "You've come a long way, Michael," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. I looked at her, the warmth of her presence calming me. "It doesn't feel real sometimes. Everything that's happened. It's like I've lived two different lives." Olivia nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Maybe you have. But that's the beauty of it, you've taken control of the narrative. You didn't let the past define you." Her words resonated deeply. She was right. I had found my voice again, both in my music and in my life. I was no longer the man who had been broken by betrayal. I was someone who had risen from it, stronger and more self-aware. As we sat there, I realized something important. I was happy. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely content. The scars were still there, but they no longer dictated my actions. Instead, they were reminders of how far I had come. "I'm glad I met you, Olivia," I said, my voice sincere. "You've been a big part of this journey." She smiled, her hand finding mine. "I'm glad I met you too, Michael. You've shown me what it means to rebuild and find strength in vulnerability." At that moment, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready to face it. With Olivia by my side and music as my constant companion, I felt grounded in a way I hadn't in a long time. This was a new chapter, and I was excited to see where it would lead. As life settled into this new rhythm, a new opportunity emerged, one that would challenge everything I had built. My manager called me one afternoon with the news that a major label was interested in signing me for a multi-album deal. It was the kind of offer that most musicians dream of: creative freedom, a significant financial boost, and the chance to reach a much larger audience.
But it also came with strings attached. The label had ideas for my next album, ideas that didn't fully align with the direction I had been taking my music.
They wanted more commercial appeal and more marketable tracks that would guarantee radio play.
It was tempting, of course. Success on that scale would open doors I had only dreamed of. But it also felt like a step back into the very world I had fought so hard to escape.
I discussed it with Alex, who saw both sides.
"This could be huge for you, Michael," he said, his voice filled with excitement.
"But I get it. You don't want to lose what makes your music yours. It's a tough call." It was tough, and as I weighed the pros and cons, I found myself torn. On one hand, the opportunity could propel my career to new heights. On the other hand, I risked sacrificing the authenticity I had worked so hard to reclaim.
That evening, I talked it over with Olivia.
She listened patiently, her support unwavering. "What do you want, Michael?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm. "Not what they want, or what others expect. What do you want?" Her question hit home. I had spent so much time thinking about the external rewards, the validation that this deal could bring, that I had lost sight of my own desires. "I want to stay true to my music," I said after a long pause. "I've already been down the road of compromise, and I know where it leads. I don't want to go back there." Olivia smiled, her eyes filled with understanding.
"Then trust yourself. You've come this far by following your instincts. Don't let anything or anyone take that away from you."
Her words gave me clarity. The decision, which had seemed so daunting, now felt clear. I didn't need the validation of a major label to prove my worth. My music, my voice, had value because it was mine. And that was enough. The next day, I informed my manager of my decision.
The label's offer, tempting as it was, wasn't the right fit for me.
I would continue on the path I had chosen, creating music that was true to who I was, regardless of the commercial appeal.
It was a decision that brought peace.
I wasn't chasing after someone else's dream, I was living my own. And in doing so, I realized that I had already achieved the success I had been searching for all along. As I moved forward, I knew there would be challenges, but I also knew that I was ready to face them. With my music, my relationships, and my sense of self intact, I was prepared to continue this journey, wherever it might lead. This was just the beginning of the next chapter. And I was excited to see how the story would unfold. The journey had been long, filled with unexpected turns, heartbreak, and moments of profound self-discovery. As I stood on the stage that night, looking out at the faces in the audience, I realized how far I had come. It wasn't the biggest venue I'd ever played, but it was packed with people who were there for the music, for the story I had to tell. This final concert was special. It was the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since that fateful day when I'd discovered Lisa's betrayal. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, finding strength in my music, in my relationships, and most importantly, within myself. The setlist that night was carefully curated, a mix of old songs and new ones, each one representing a chapter in my journey. I had written the final track just a few weeks before, inspired by the peace I had found in recent months. It was a song about closure, about accepting the past and embracing the future with open arms. As I strummed the opening chords, the room fell silent. The lyrics poured out of me effortlessly, each word a testament to the resilience I had found within. The crowd listened intently, their energy feeding into mine. It was as if we were all connected in that moment, sharing in the power of the music. When the final note faded, the applause erupted. But it wasn't the thunderous, frenzied applause of a typical concert. It was something deeper, more meaningful, an acknowledgement of the journey we had all been on together. I soaked it in, letting the moment wash over me. As I stepped off the stage, I was greeted by familiar faces. Alex, who had been my steadfast collaborator through it all, pulled me into a tight hug. "You did it, man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. This was incredible. Olivia was there too, her eyes shining with pride. She didn't need to say anything, her presence alone was enough. She had been my anchor, my guiding light through the storm. We exchanged a look that said everything. We had both come full circle.
Later that night, after the crowd had dispersed and the venue had emptied, I found myself alone on the stage, gazing out at the empty seats. The quiet was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once defined my life.
I thought about everything that had led me to this point.
Lisa, James, the betrayal, the pain. It was all a distant memory now, something that had shaped me but no longer held power over me.
I had let it go, and in doing so, I had found freedom.
As I stood there, I felt a deep sense of gratitude.
For the music that had guided me through the darkest of times. For the people who had supported me along the way. And for the knowledge that I had the strength to face whatever came next.
This wasn't the end of the story.
In many ways, it was just the beginning. The future was wide open, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. With one last look at the stage, I turned and walked out into the night. Ready to embrace whatever awaited me on the other side.